After I said no to Rachel that Monday, everything seemed fine. She found someone else to help with the proposal. Later that day, she even messaged me, "All good. Mark helped me." I told myself I had worried for nothing. But 2 days later, something felt different. It started with something very small. Rachel walks past my desk in the morning. Usually she would stop and say something. Maybe, "How's your morning going?" Or, "Did you survive that meeting yesterday?" Sometimes she would just make a face at my coffee and say, "That looks dangerous." But that morning she only said, "Morning." Then she kept walking. I watched her for a second. It probably meant nothing. At least, that was what I told myself. Around 10, I sent her a message about a client file. I wrote, "Hey, do you know which version we're using?" She replied 3 minutes later, "The latest one." That was it. No smiley face, no extra sentence, not even a "yep." I stared at the message longer than I should have. Was that normal? Was she annoyed? Was I imagining it? I went back to work. But I kept noticing little things. At lunch, Rachel sat with 2 people from finance. Usually, if she saw me, she would wave me over. This time, she did not. I stood near the entrance of the cafeteria holding my tray. For a second, I thought about walking over anyway. Then I changed my mind. I sat at another table and immediately started overthinking. Maybe saying no had changed things. Maybe she had said all good because she was being polite. Maybe thanks anyway had not really meant thanks. Maybe she had been annoyed the whole time. By the time I finished lunch, I had built an entire story in my head, and I had almost no evidence. That afternoon, things got worse. We had a short team meeting at 2. Rachel was sitting across from me. Before the meeting started, everyone was chatting. Someone mentioned a restaurant near the office. Rachel said, "I've been meaning to try that place." I almost jumped into the conversation. Then she looked down at her laptop. The moment passed. I started wondering if she was avoiding eye contact. Halfway through the meeting, our manager asked Rachel a question. Rachel said, "Sorry, I'm a little scattered today." Our manager said, "No worries. Take your time." Rachel smiled. I noticed that too. She smiled at our manager, but she had barely smiled at me all day. At that point, I was convinced something was wrong. After the meeting, I went straight to Maya. She was at her desk answering emails. I said quietly, "Do you have a second?" Maya looked up. She said, "Sure, what happened?" Apparently, my face had already answered part of the question. I told her about Rachel, the short messages, the quick morning, lunch, the meeting, the lack of eye contact. Maya listened without interrupting. Then she asked, "Did Rachel actually say she was upset with you?" I said, "No." "Did she say the proposal thing bothered her?" "No." Maya tilted her head. Then she said, "You might be reading too much into it." I knew the words, but I had never really noticed that expression before. Reading too much into it did not mean reading anything. It meant giving something more meaning than it probably had. That was exactly what I had been doing all day. I said, "But she really does seem different." Maya said, "Maybe. But different doesn't always mean angry." Then she lowered her voice. She said, "She's been swamped this week." I had heard swamped before. Literally, it made me think of being surrounded by water. But at work, "I'm swamped" meant completely overloaded with work. Maya continued, "Her client moved a deadline up, and she's covering for someone who's out sick." Suddenly, Rachel's short messages looked very different. Maybe they were not cold. Maybe they were just fast. I said, "So you think we're okay?" Maya smiled. She said, "From what you told me, I think you're probably good." There was another expression. "You're good." At work, it often meant there was no problem between people. Not that anyone was literally good or bad. I felt better, but not completely. I still wanted to hear it from Rachel. The next morning, I got my chance. Rachel was alone in the break room making coffee. I almost turned around. Then I decided that wondering was worse than asking. I walked in. I said, "Hey, can I ask you something a little awkward?" Rachel looked surprised. She said, "Sure." I said, "I hope I didn't come across as rude the other day when I couldn't help with the proposal." Rachel blinked. Then she laughed. Not a mean laugh. A genuinely surprised laugh. She said, "What? No." I said, "Really?" She said, "We're good." There it was again. "We're good." Then she added, "I didn't mean anything by being quiet." That sentence immediately stood out to me. I didn't mean anything by it. It was a very useful way to say that an action or comment had no hidden message. Rachel continued, I've just been swamped. I had 2 client calls yesterday and my deadline got moved up. I almost laughed at how closely that matched what Maya had told me. I said, okay. I may have read too much into it. Rachel smiled. She said, a little. Then she took a sip of coffee. She said, honestly, I figured you were busy that day. There was another phrase I heard all the time. I figured it sounded simple. But in everyday office English, it was often a very natural way to say, I assumed or I thought. Rachel said, you had meetings all morning. I figured you had your own deadlines. I had spent 2 days worrying that she thought I was selfish. Meanwhile, she had simply assumed I was busy. That was humbling. I said, I guess I thought you were avoiding me. Rachel looked genuinely confused. She said, no, not at all. Then she added, I've barely had time to talk to anyone this week. That explained lunch too. She had not chosen not to invite me. She had simply sat down wherever there was space. The story I had built in my head disappeared in about 3 minutes. Before I left the break room, Rachel said one more thing. She said, seriously, don't read too much into short messages from me this week. If I send you K, it probably just means I'm running between meetings. I laughed. That was exactly the kind of thing I needed to hear. Later that day, I started noticing how often office English depended on context. All good could mean there was no problem. We're good could mean the relationship was fine. I figured you were busy could mean I assumed you had a lot going on. I didn't mean anything by it could remove a hidden meaning I had imagined, and don't read too much into it could save me from writing an entire drama in my head. The funny thing was, none of those expressions used difficult words. I knew every word, but understanding the words was not the same as understanding the situation. That was becoming one of the biggest lessons of working in English. Sometimes the language was simple. The hard part was everything around it, the timing, the tone, the person's workload, what had happened earlier that day, and sometimes what had nothing to do with me at all. A week earlier, I thought being good at office English meant knowing the right phrases. Now I was starting to think it also meant knowing when not to invent a meaning that was not there. That lesson helped me almost immediately. A few days later, another coworker told me, I'll take care of it, so I believed him. I waited and waited. By the next afternoon, nothing had happened. This time, the problem was not whether someone was angry with me. The problem was whether I should remind him and how to do it without sounding like I was chasing him. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe to our channel for more real-life office English.